Is this some kind of joke? Helen's voice, sharp and lacquered as her nails, cut through the quiet hum of the gun store's air conditioning. Stanley Grant, 84 years old, stood patiently at the glass counter, his reflection a pale, stooped ghost beside her vibrant, disdainful one. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on a vintage M1 Garand mounted on the wall behind her. He had carried one just like it through the frozen hell of the chosen reservoir. Her question hung in the air, a deliberate insult. The other two customers in the store, both younger men, shifted their feet, suddenly finding the rows of polished steel and polymer intensely interesting. The fluorescent lights of Aegis Armory were bright and unforgiving, making the store feel more like a surgical theater than a place that sold tools of history and defense. It was a high-end establishment, all brushed aluminum and tactical displays. Helen, the store's manager, embodied its sterile aesthetic. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe ponytail, and her polo shirt embroidered with the store's logo was crisply starched. She looked at Stanley as if he were a piece of lint on her otherwise perfect world. His clothes were simple and worn, a faded red shirt, clean but frayed jeans, and old leather boots. To her he was an anachronism, a relic who had wandered in from a bygone era and was now fogging up her pristine glass. "Sir," she said, drawing out the word until it became a mockery. "This is a serious place of business. We sell precision instruments, not toys for old men to play with. Are you going to buy something, or are you just here to reminisce?" Stanley finally moved his eyes from the rifle to her. They were pale blue, clouded by age but holding a depth that seemed to absorb the harsh lighting and give nothing back. "I'd like to purchase that M1 Garand," he said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble that seemed to come from his chest, not his throat. It held no tremor, no hint of agitation. Helen let out a short, incredulous laugh. She leaned forward, placing her perfectly manicured hands on the counter. "That is a collector's piece. A fully functional .30-06 semi-automatic battle rifle. It's $5,000, and frankly you don't look like you're in the market for a $5,000 wall hanger." Behind her, a young employee named Kyle, who had been restocking ammunition, froze. He looked from his boss's sneering face to the old man's placid one, a knot of discomfort tightening in his stomach. He knew Helen could be abrasive, but this was a new level of cruel. "I'm aware of the price," Stanley said, his tone unchanging. "I'm also aware of its function. I'm not going to hang it on a wall." This seemed to fuel Helen's condescension. "What are you going to do with it? Take it to the range?" "Sir, the recoil on that rifle could dislocate your shoulder. You have to be able to handle a firearm like that safely. Our insurance policy, not to mention my conscience, requires that I only sell to competent, responsible individuals." The implication was clear. She thought him frail, senile, and dangerous, a liability. One of the other customers, a man in his late 20s wearing a tactical vest and a beard, chuckled under his breath. He was here to pick up a custom AR-15, and this little sideshow was amusing. The other customer, a younger man in a simple hoodie, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He had a military-style haircut, and his eyes kept flicking to the old man, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. "I can assure you," Stanley said, his patience a deep, unshakable well, "I am competent." "I'll be the judge of that," Helen snapped. "Let's see your paperwork. Driver's license, firearm purchaser card, and proof of address. And I'll need to run a background check, of course, assuming you even pass." She tapped a long red nail on the counter impatiently. "Chop, chop. I don't have all day." Slowly, deliberately, Stanley reached into the back pocket of his jeans. He pulled out a leather wallet. It was ancient, the dark brown hide worn smooth and soft as cloth in some places, cracked and webbed with 1,000 fine lines in others. The stitching was frayed, and a dark faded stain marked one corner. He laid it on the glass counter. The sound it made was a soft, tired sigh. Helen wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Seriously? Is that thing going to fall apart on my counter?" As Stanley's gnarled fingers fumbled with the clasp, the world for him momentarily dissolved. The smell of gun oil and air conditioning was replaced by the biting metallic scent of snow and cordite. The bright store lights faded into the gray, unforgiving sky of North Korea in the winter of 1950. He wasn't seeing Helen's sneering face, but the face of his squad leader, Sergeant Frank Miller, 19 years old and aged 100 years by war. Frank was pressing this very wallet into his hand just hours before the Chinese People's Volunteer Army swarmed their position at the chosen reservoir. "Here," Frank had said, his breath pluming in the sub-zero air. "Yours is soaked through. Keep your girl's picture in this one. It's good leather. It'll bring you home." The memory was a lightning strike, there and gone in an instant. Frank never made it home. The wallet did. Stanley carefully extracted his driver's license and the necessary permits, his hands slow but perfectly steady. He pushed them across the counter. Helen snatched them up. She scrutinized the license, her eyes narrowing. Stanley Grant, 84 years old, says here you live over in the old Veterans Housing Complex. Figures. She turned to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with noisy, aggressive clicks. All right, Stanley, let's see what secrets you're hiding. The young man in the hoodie had seen enough. He had watched the entire exchange, his anger a slow burn. He wasn't just any customer. He was a recently discharged Army Ranger, Sergeant Thomas Riker. He had spent 4 years in Afghanistan, and he knew a soldier when he saw one. He didn't know the old man's story, but he recognized the bearing. It was in the straightness of his back, despite his age. It was in the unnerving stillness of his hands. It was in the quiet dignity that absorbed every insult Helen threw and reflected nothing back. Most of all, it was in his eyes. Riker had seen eyes like that before, in the faces of men who had seen and done things that civilians like Helen could never comprehend. The way she had mocked the old wallet was the final straw. For Riker, a man's wallet, his dog tags, a worn Zippo lighter, these weren't just objects. They were artifacts of a life, repositories of memory and sacrifice. Helen's disrespect was more than just rude, it was a desecration. While she was busy at the computer making performative sighs and muttering about the slowness of the system, Riker discreetly pulled out his phone. He walked to the far end of the store, near a rack of hunting camouflage, pretending to browse. He didn't call the police. He knew that would only escalate the situation and further humiliate the old man. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he hadn't used in a year, a number he was given by his former company commander upon his discharge. It was a direct line to the non-commissioned officer in charge of the Public Affairs and Community Liaison Office at Fort Hamilton, the sprawling military base just 20 miles outside of town. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Sergeant Major Evans. Sergeant Major, this is Thomas Riker. We met last year. I was in Alpha Company, 3rd Ranger Battalion. I remember you, Riker. What can I do for you? Evans's voice was all business. Sir, I'm at Aegis Armory on the north side of town, Riker said, keeping his voice low. There's an elderly veteran here, and the manager is. She's treating him with extreme disrespect, humiliating him in front of everyone. I think he's trying to buy an M1, and she's treating him like a senile old fool. A lot of old-timers out there, Riker. What's his name? She said it out loud when she took his license. His name is Stanley Grant. There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. Riker thought for a second the call had been dropped. Sergeant Major, are you there? The voice that came back was completely different. The gruff, business-like tone was gone, replaced by something Riker had only ever heard from senior NCOs in moments of extreme crisis. It was a voice of pure, compressed urgency. Riker, what did you say his name was? Stanley Grant, sir. Stay where you are. Do not engage. Do not let him leave the store if you can help it. I'm on my way. The line went dead. Riker stood frozen for a moment, the phone still pressed to his ear. He had expected a thanks for the tip, or a we'll look into it. He had not expected a reaction that sounded like someone had just announced a national emergency. Something was happening. Something big. Inside the Public Affairs office at Fort Hamilton, Sergeant Major Kevin Evans was already moving. He didn't run, but he moved with a speed and purpose that made everyone in the open plan office stop what they were doing and stare. He bypassed his own terminal and went straight to the secure network computer in the corner, one reserved for accessing classified personnel files. He typed in the name, Grant, Stanley T. He hit enter. The screen blinked, and then a file appeared. It was 90% redacted. Entire paragraphs were blacked out. But the words that remained were enough to make the blood drain from Evans's face. Chosen reservoir. Survivor. 5th Special Forces Group, Vietnam. Project Gamma, classified. Instructor. U.S. Army Sniper School, classified. And then at the top, a single gleaming line of text beside a small pixelated photo of a young man with old eyes. Medal of Honor. Congressional. Citation classified. Action date December 2nd, 1950. Evans let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He walked, stiff-legged, directly to the office of the base commander, Colonel James Davies. He didn't knock. He opened the door and stood in the doorway, interrupting a meeting Davies was having with 2 civilian contractors. Sir, Evans said, his voice tight. We have a situation. Davies looked up, annoyed at the interruption. What is it, Sergeant Major? This had better be important. It is, sir, Evans said, his eyes like steel chips. Stanley Grant is in a gun store downtown, and the manager is about to call the police on him for being old. Colonel Davis's face went through a rapid series of emotions. First annoyance, then confusion, then dawning comprehension, and finally, a deep, bone-chilling alarm. He stood up so quickly his own chair banged against the credenza behind him. "Get the car," he said to Evans, his voice a low, dangerous command. "Get my honor guard detail and 2 MP units. Now." He turned to the bewildered contractors. "Gentlemen, this meeting is over." Back at Aegis Armory, Helen was enjoying her power. The background check had come back clean, of course, but she wasn't going to tell Stanley that. She had decided she was going to refuse the sale on principle. It was her store, her rules. "Well, Stanley," she said, turning away from the computer with a triumphant smirk, "it seems your record is clean, but that doesn't change the facts. I am not comfortable selling a weapon of this caliber to a man of your advanced age. It's a matter of public safety, so I'm going to have to refuse the sale." Stanley simply nodded, his face unreadable. He reached for his wallet and IDs. Helen said, placing her hand